The iron stakes bit into her wrists so deeply that Grakka could no longer feel her hands, and she decided that was probably a mercy from whatever god still listened to dying orcs. The human soldiers had driven the metal pegs into the hard earth at dawn, spreading her arms wide and staking her legs apart, so she couldn't even curl against the sun that was already beginning to cook her green skin. And then they'd ridden away laughing about how the monster would be crow food by nightfall. She'd stopped struggling an hour ago when the ropes had cut through to bone, and the blood had stopped flowing from the wounds because there wasn't enough moisture left in her body to bleed properly. The sky overhead was a blue so perfect it seemed cruel, and Grakka found herself thinking about water, about the cold mountain streams near her clan's settlement, about the way her mother used to say that water remembered everything and carried the memories of the world in its flow. Her mother was dead now, killed in the same raid that had gotten Grakka captured, and her father and brothers were probably dead too, and her little sister Marga, who just turned 15 and still braided flowers into her black hair like a child. The human army had come through the valley like a scythe through wheat, burning and killing, and they'd said it was justice for orc raids on human settlements. But Grakka's clan hadn't raided anyone in 3 generations, not since her grandfather had made peace with the border villages and started trading smoked meat for grain and metalwork. The sun climbed higher, and Grakka's tongue had swollen so large in her mouth that she couldn't have screamed even if she'd wanted to, and her vision was starting to go strange at the edges, full of dark spots that swam and danced. She thought about giving up, about just closing her eyes and letting go, but some stubborn part of her that had always gotten her in trouble kept her conscious, kept her breathing even when each breath felt like swallowing broken glass. That was when she heard the wagon. At first she thought it was a hallucination, just another trick her dying brain was playing, but the creaking of wooden wheels and the steady clip-clop of horse hooves kept getting louder, closer. And then a shadow fell across her face and blocked out the murderous sun. "Merciful God," a man's voice said, and it was shocked and horrified in a way that made something in Grakka's chest twist, because she hadn't heard a human sound horrified on her behalf in a very long time. She couldn't turn her head to look at him, could barely crack her eyes open, but she heard him jump down from the wagon seat, and then his boots were crunching in the dry grass beside her. He came into her limited field of vision, and she saw a young man, maybe 25 or 30, with brown hair that badly needed cutting, and a face that was sunburned across the nose and cheeks. He was wearing a farmer's rough spun clothes, all patched elbows and dirt on the knees, and his eyes were the color of chestnuts, and they looked absolutely stricken. "Who did this to you?" he asked, and then shook his head because obviously she couldn't answer. "Never mind, stupid question." "Hold on, just hold on, I'll get you loose." He pulled a knife from his belt, and Grakka felt a distant flicker of fear, because humans with knives had featured prominently in her recent nightmares. But he just started sawing at the ropes around her right wrist, cutting through the blood-stiffened fibers with quick, efficient movements. When her arm came free, it flopped to the ground like a dead thing, and she couldn't even feel it. The farmer moved to her other wrist, talking the whole time in a low, steady voice like he was calming a spooked horse. "You're going to be all right, I've got you. Just need to get these ropes cut. My name's Xavier Kine. I've got a farm about 2 miles south of here. Going to take you there, get you water and shade and proper bandages." He cut her left wrist free and then moved to her ankles, and Grakka's vision was starting to tunnel, everything going dark except for his face bent over her legs as he worked. She tried to say something, to warn him that helping an orc would get him killed if anyone found out, but all that came out was a cracked, wheezing sound. "Don't try to talk," Xavier said, glancing up at her with those worried chestnut eyes. "Save your strength. There we go, that's the last one." Her legs came free, and she tried to pull them together, to curl into a defensive ball, but her body wouldn't obey her anymore. She just lay there in the dirt like a broken doll, and humiliation burned through her worse than the sun had, because orcs were supposed to be strong, supposed to be warriors, and here she was helpless as a newborn. Xavier was looking at her with something like panic on his face. "Can you stand?" "No, of course you can't. What am I thinking?" He looked around as if hoping someone else would appear to tell him what to do, but the road was empty in both directions, just dry grassland rolling away to distant hills. "Right, I'm going to have to carry you. This might hurt, I'm sorry." He bent down and slid his arms under her shoulders and knees, and even though he'd warned her, it still hurt so badly when he lifted her that Grakka's vision went completely black for a few seconds. When it came back, she was pressed against his chest, her head lolling against his shoulder, and she could smell him, sweat and hay and honest dirt, so different from the metal and blood smell of the soldiers. Xavier carried her to the wagon, moving as smoothly as he could but still jostling her enough that pain kept spiking through her limbs in sharp bursts. The wagon bed was half full of seed sacks, and there was a folded blanket on the seat, and he managed to climb up one-handed while holding her, and then settled her as gently as possible on the blanket. "Water," he muttered, reaching under the seat and pulling out a clay jug. "Here, try to drink a little, just a little at first, or you'll be sick." He lifted her head with one hand and tipped the jug to her cracked lips with the other, and the first drops of water that touched her tongue were so good she almost wept. She managed to swallow a few small sips before he pulled the jug away, and her throat immediately felt a tiny bit less like sandpaper. "More," she managed to rasp out, the first word she'd spoken in days. "In a minute," Xavier said firmly. "Too much at once will make you vomit and you'll just lose it all. We need to get you out of this sun first." He looked around again, and Grakka could see him thinking, calculating. "My farm. No one else lives there. It's safe. You'll be safe." He climbed back to the driver's seat and snapped the reins, and the horse started plodding down the road at a steady walk. Xavier kept looking back at her over his shoulder every few seconds like he was afraid she'd disappear or die, and Grakka kept her eyes fixed on him, because he was the only real thing in a world that had gone surreal and nightmarish. She must have passed out at some point, because the next thing she knew the wagon had stopped, and Xavier was lifting her again, carrying her through a doorway into blessed shade. She caught confused impressions of a small farmhouse, neat and clean but sparse, a single room with a fireplace at one end and a bed at the other, and a rough wooden table in between. Xavier laid her on the bed, which was the softest thing Grakka had felt in weeks, and immediately started pulling off her torn leather armor. She tried to help, but her hands were useless, the fingers swollen and dark, so she just lay there while he stripped her down to her thin undershirt and leggings, his face carefully neutral and professional like he was doctoring a sick animal. "Rope burns," he said, examining her wrists and ankles. "Bad ones, probably infected already, and you're severely dehydrated and sunburned, and these bruises look like you took some beatings." He met her eyes. "I'm going to be honest with you, you're in very bad shape, but I think I can help you if you'll let me, if you'll trust me." Grakka stared at him, this human farmer with kind eyes who'd stopped to save an orc he could have just as easily left to die, and something in her chest cracked open. "Why?" she whispered. "Why help me?" Xavier sat back on his heels, considering the question seriously. "My father used to say that you can judge a man's character by how he treats those who can do nothing for him. You needed help. I'm not going to just ride past someone who's suffering, no matter what they are." He paused, And for what it's worth, I don't think orcs are monsters. I've met plenty of humans who were more monstrous than any orc I've ever seen. Not seen many orcs then, Grakka said, but there was no heat in it. Seen enough, Xavier replied. He stood up and went to a cupboard, pulling out strips of clean cloth and a clay pot of something that smelled like herbs. Seen an orc trader help a human child who'd fallen in a river, years ago. The child's parents still tried to drive the orc off with stones afterward. That taught me something about who the real savages are. He came back to the bed and started cleaning her wrist wounds with careful, gentle touches, and Grakka hissed in pain but held still. The herb paste he spread on the rope burned stung like fire at first, but then went blessedly cool and numb, and he wrapped each wrist in clean bandages with the efficiency of someone who'd done plenty of doctoring on injured livestock. While he worked on her ankles, she studied him, really looked at him for the first time. He was lean and muscled the way farmers got, all practical strength without any bulk, and his hands were calloused but clean, with short trimmed nails. His face had good bones under the sunburn, a strong jaw and a straight nose that looked like it had been broken at least once, and his hair kept falling in his eyes as he worked, so he had to keep pushing it back impatiently. "You live alone?" Grakka asked, her voice getting stronger now that she'd had water. "For the past 2 years," Xavier said, wrapping the last bandage around her left ankle. "My parents died of fever, left me the farm. Had a younger sister, but she married a merchant and moved to a town 3 days east. She wanted me to sell the farm and come with her, but I like it here, quiet, simple." "Not going to be so simple now," Grakka pointed out. "You've got an orc in your bed." Xavier's mouth twitched in what might have been the start of a smile. "You make a valid point. Here, drink more water slowly." He helped her sit up enough to drink from the jug, and this time he let her have more, probably half a pint before he made her stop. Her stomach cramped a little, but the water stayed down, and Grakka could feel her body starting to desperately absorb the moisture, her head clearing a bit more with each swallow. "What's your name?" Xavier asked, setting the water jug aside. "Grakka. Grakka of the Stone River clan." She paused. "Or I was. Don't know if there's a Stone River clan anymore." Xavier's expression went soft with sympathy. "I heard about raids in the Northern Valley. The army came through here a week ago, heading back south. They were bragging about putting down an orc uprising." He said the word uprising with bitter irony. "I'm sorry. For what happened to your people?" "Not your fault," Grakka said, even though part of her wanted to rage at him anyway, just because he was human and humans had done this. But he'd saved her life, and that bought him more grace than her anger. "You risk much, helping me." "No one comes out this way much," Xavier said with a shrug that tried to be casual but didn't quite make it. "We'll keep you hidden until you're healed enough to travel. Then you can decide what you want to do, where you want to go." Grakka closed her eyes, exhaustion crashing over her now that the immediate crisis had passed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You gave me my life back. That's a debt I can never repay." "Don't worry about debts," Xavier said, and she felt him pull a blanket over her despite the heat. "Just focus on healing. We'll figure out the rest later." She wanted to argue, to tell him that orcs always paid their debts, that honor demanded it, but sleep was pulling her down into darkness and she couldn't fight it anymore. The last thing she felt was Xavier's hand on her forehead, checking for fever, his touch surprisingly gentle for a human. When Grakka woke again, it was dark outside and cool, and there was a candle burning on the table casting soft shadows on the walls. Xavier was sitting in a chair near the bed, whittling something from a piece of wood, the knife making soft shick-shick sounds as he worked. He looked up when she stirred and immediately set the whittling aside. "How do you feel?" he asked, coming to sit on the edge of the bed. Grakka took stock of herself. Her body still hurt everywhere, but it was a duller pain now, more manageable, and her mouth didn't feel like it was full of sand anymore. Better. Still feel like I was trampled by horses, but better. That's good. You slept for about 6 hours. Think you could eat something? I made broth. It's not much, but it'll give you some strength. Her stomach growled at the mention of food, and Xavier smiled and went to the fireplace where a pot was hanging over low coals. He ladled out a bowl of broth that smelled like chicken and vegetables, and came back to help her sit up against the pillows he'd piled behind her. "Can you hold the bowl, or do you need me to feed you?" he asked without any condescension, just practical concern. Grakka looked at her bandaged hands and flexed her fingers experimentally. They hurt and they were stiff, but they moved. "I can hold it." Xavier handed her the bowl and she wrapped both hands around it, absorbing the warmth before she took a careful sip. The broth was simple but well made, rich and salty, and her body sang with gratitude as the food hit her stomach. She drank it slowly, taking small sips the way Xavier had given her water, and he watched her with that same careful attention, like he was ready to grab the bowl if she started to falter. "This is good," Grakka said after she'd gotten about half the bowl down. "You cook well for a bachelor farmer." "Had to learn after my mother died," Xavier said with a shrug. "It was either learn to cook or starve, and I'm too stubborn to starve." Grakka smiled despite herself, just a small curve of her lips, and saw Xavier's eyes widen slightly, like he was surprised to see an orc smile. It reminded her that he probably didn't know much about orcs, had probably never been this close to one for this long, and she was suddenly aware of how she must look to him, all green skin and tusks and pointed ears, so different from human women. "Never been nursed by a human before," she said, taking another sip of broth. "My mother would have laughed herself sick at the idea." "What was she like?" "Your mother?" Xavier asked, settling back in his chair. Grakka felt the grief rise up fresh and sharp, but talking about her mother also felt right, like keeping her memory alive. Strong, stubborn. She could track a deer for 3 days through mountains and never lose the trail. "She taught me to hunt, to fight, to read the weather in the clouds and the animals' behavior. She told terrible jokes that only she found funny." Grakka's voice cracked a little. "She died defending our home, took 5 soldiers with her." "She sounds like she was formidable," Xavier said quietly. "I'm sorry you lost her." They sat in silence for a while, Grakka drinking her broth and Xavier watching the candle flame flicker. Outside a night bird called, long and mournful, and the sound made Grakka's chest ache with homesickness for her mountains, her valley, her people who were probably all dead now. "What will you do?" Xavier asked eventually. "After you heal, I mean. Do you have family elsewhere, other clans who'd take you in?" Grakka shook her head. "Stone River clan kept to ourselves, didn't have close ties with other clans. My mother's sister married into the Iron Peak clan 2 ranges north, but I don't know if they'd welcome me. Might see me as bad luck, a survivor when everyone else died." "That's superstitious nonsense," Xavier said with sudden heat. "You survived because you're strong, not because you're cursed." "You don't know orc ways," Grakka said, but she felt warmed by his fierce defense of her. "We're a people of omens and signs. A soul survivor can be seen as blessed or cursed depending on how the shaman reads the bones." Xavier frowned like he was thinking hard about something, then seemed to come to a decision. "You could stay here. For a while, anyway. Until you figure out where you want to go, what you want to do." Grakka stared at him. "That's insane. If anyone finds out you're harboring an orc, they'll burn your farm and probably hang you." "Then we'll make sure no one finds out," Xavier said with a calm certainty that was probably completely unjustified but somehow reassuring anyway. "Like I said, people don't come out this way much. I do my own farming, take my produce to market once a month in a village about 8 miles south. The nearest neighbor is 3 miles east and he's half deaf and minds his own business. We can keep you hidden." "Why would you do that?" Grakka asked, searching his face for some sign of ulterior motive, some hint of the reasons human men usually wanted to keep women around. "What do you get out of it?" Xavier met her eyes steadily. "Companionship, maybe. It gets lonely out here. And if I'm being completely honest, I could use help around the farm, if you're willing once you're healed. If not, that's fine too. You can just rest and recover and then leave when you're ready. No obligations." Grakka wanted to suspect him of lying, of having some hidden agenda, but his eyes were clear and honest, and his offer had the ring of truth to it. And the alternative was striking out alone, injured and hunted, hoping to find distant relatives who might reject her. At least here she had shelter, food, safety for the moment. "I'll stay," she said finally. "For a while, until I heal, and I'll help with the farm work, pay my way." "Fair enough," Xavier said, and smiled, a real smile that lit up his whole face and made him look younger. "We'll figure it out as we go." Over the next few days, Grakka slowly regained her strength, sleeping long hours and waking to find Xavier had left food and water within easy reach while he worked outside. On the third day, she was strong enough to get out of bed and walk around the small farmhouse, examining Xavier's life through the things he'd surrounded himself with. The house was neat, but not fussy. Everything practical and well-made but showing signs of wear. There were books on a shelf near the fireplace, mostly agricultural treatises and a few volumes of poetry that surprised her. A row of wooden animals sat on the mantel, small carved figures of horses and sheep and birds, clearly the work of years of whittling practice. The bed she'd been sleeping in was the only bed, which meant Xavier had been sleeping on the floor or in the chair, and that made something uncomfortable twist in her chest. She was examining the carved animals when Xavier came in for lunch, his shirt soaked with sweat and his hair full of chaff from whatever he'd been harvesting. He stopped short when he saw her standing, and pleasure crossed his face. "You're up. That's great, that's really great. How do you feel?" "Weak still," Grakka admitted, "but better. The bandages are healing well. I checked them this morning. You did good work." "I've sewn up plenty of cuts on livestock," Xavier said, going to wash his hands in the basin near the door. "Figured the principles were the same. Are you hungry?" "I can make something." "I can make something," Grakka said firmly. "You've been doing everything. Let me help." Xavier looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression must have convinced him to let her have this, so he just nodded and sat down at the table. Grakka found bread and cheese and dried meat, and put together a simple meal while Xavier watched her move around his kitchen with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You've been sleeping on the floor," she said as she set the food on the table. "That's not right. It's your home, your bed." "You were injured," Xavier said with a shrug. "You needed the bed more than I did. I'm healing now. We can share the bed, or I can take the floor." She saw his face flush red and added quickly, "Orcs don't have the same modesty customs as humans. Sharing sleep space is practical, nothing more. But if it makes you uncomfortable, I'll sleep on the floor." "No, no, you're still recovering," Xavier said quickly, his face still red. "I'm fine on the floor, really." Grakka sat down across from him and fixed him with a steady look. "Xavier, you saved my life. You fed me and sheltered me and asked nothing in return. The least you can do is let me preserve your dignity by not making you sleep on the floor in your own home. We'll share the bed. I promise I don't bite." She paused. "Unless you want me to." The joke surprised a laugh out of him, a genuine startled laugh, and Grakka felt something warm bloom in her chest at the sound. Xavier had a good laugh, open and real, and she realized she wanted to hear it more often. "All right," Xavier said, still smiling. "We'll share the bed. But you have to promise to tell me if I snore." "Only if you promise the same," Grakka replied, and they ate their lunch in comfortable silence, something shifting between them into easier territory. That night, they lay down on opposite sides of the bed, both of them so carefully not touching that there was a good foot of space between them. And Grakka stared up at the dark ceiling and listened to Xavier breathe. She'd shared sleep space with her clan all her life. Orcs piled together in the communal longhouse for warmth and safety, so having another person nearby should have felt normal. But this felt different, charged with something she couldn't quite name, hyper-aware of Xavier's presence in a way that had nothing to do with practical safety. "Grakka," Xavier's voice came soft in the darkness. "Can I ask you something?" "Ask. What happened?" "I mean, I know the army raided your clan, but how did you end up staked out there? That seems especially cruel even for soldiers." Grakka was quiet for a long moment, deciding how much to tell him. "I killed an officer," she said finally. "He was going to do things to my little sister. Terrible things. So I crushed his skull with a rock. His men caught me and decided that ordinary execution was too good for an orc who'd killed one of theirs, so they staked me out for the sun and the scavengers." She heard Xavier suck in a sharp breath. "Your sister. Did she?" "I don't know," Grakka said, and her voice was flat and hard because that was the only way to say it without breaking. "I don't know if she survived, if any of them survived. The last thing I saw before they dragged me away was fire. Everything burning." Xavier was quiet for a long time, and then she felt the bed shift as he moved closer, his hand finding hers in the darkness and squeezing gently. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that happened to you, to your family." Grakka squeezed back, this human farmer with his gentle hands and his kind eyes who'd given her back her life. "You're a good man, Xavier Kine, better than you probably know." "I'm just a man," Xavier said softly, "trying to do the right thing." They fell asleep like that, hands linked in the darkness, and for the first time since the raid Grakka slept without nightmares. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Grakka regained her strength quickly, orc constitution proving its worth, and within a week, she was helping Xavier around the farm. At first he protested that she should rest longer, but she insisted, needing to move to work, to do something productive instead of sitting around dwelling on her losses. She discovered that farming was harder than it looked, that there was a skill to scything wheat and stacking hay and winnowing grain that Xavier made look easy but took her time to learn. He was patient with her, showing her techniques and correcting her form without ever making her feel stupid or clumsy, and she found herself enjoying the work despite the way it made her muscles ache. Xavier, for his part, seemed endlessly fascinated by her orc nature, asking questions about her people, their customs, their way of life. Grakka found herself telling him things she'd never thought to explain to a human, about how orc clans were matrilineal, how they measured wealth in stories and honor rather than gold, how their shamans could read the future in the way smoke rose from sacred fires. "So your mother was the clan leader?" Xavier asked one afternoon as they took a break from harvesting, sitting in the shade of the barn and sharing a jug of cool water. "My grandmother was the clan mother, the eldest and wisest," Grakka explained. "My mother would have taken that role eventually when grandmother passed. Now I suppose that duty would fall to me if there was a clan left to lead." "That's a heavy burden," Xavier said quietly. "It's a dead burden," Grakka replied with more bitterness than she'd intended. "Can't lead ghosts." Xavier was quiet for a moment, then said, My father used to say that a people aren't dead as long as someone's alive to remember them. You carry your clan with you, Grakka. Their stories, their ways. That matters. Grakka looked at him, this human who kept saying things that hit her right in the chest, and felt something shift inside her. It wasn't attraction, not exactly, or at least not only attraction, though she'd noticed the way his shoulders moved under his shirt when he worked, and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. It was something deeper, a recognition, a sense that here was someone who saw her as a person rather than a monster or a curiosity. "You're wiser than you look, farmer," she said, keeping her tone light to cover the emotion underneath. "I look plenty wise," Xavier protested with mock offense. "I'll have you know I'm considered quite the intellectual in my family. My sister says I read too much." "Your sister sounds smart." "She is. You'd like her, I think. She has a sharp tongue and doesn't suffer fools." Xavier paused. "I write to her sometimes, tell her about the farm." "Haven't mentioned you yet. Didn't know what to say." "Probably best not to mention the orc woman you're hiding," Grakka agreed. "Might give her ideas about your sanity." They smiled at each other, and Grakka felt it again, that pull, that warmth. She looked away first, unsettled by the strength of it. The summer deepened into high heat, and they worked the farm together through the long days, falling into bed exhausted each night. The careful distance they'd maintained that first night had gradually dissolved, and now they slept close together, sometimes waking to find themselves tangled up, her head on his shoulder or his arm thrown across her waist. Neither of them acknowledged it in the daylight, but Grakka found herself looking forward to the nights, to that innocent intimacy in the darkness. She was also becoming more aware of the danger they were in, the risk Xavier was taking by keeping her. Once when they were working in the far field, they saw a rider in the distance on the road, and Grakka had immediately dropped flat in the wheat while Xavier stood and waved casually until the rider passed. Her heart had hammered the whole time, imagining soldiers coming, finding her, burning Xavier's farm the way they'd burned her village. "This can't last," she said that night as they lay in bed, the words pulled from her by anxiety and realism. "Someone will see me eventually. You'll be punished for helping me." "Then we'll be careful," Xavier said, his voice steady in the darkness. "You stay close to the house when anyone's around. We'll say you're a cousin from the north if anyone asks. Keep your hair covered and your tusks hidden. It'll be fine." "You don't know that." "No," Xavier admitted, "but I'm not going to throw you out just because there's risk. That's not who I am." Grakka rolled over to face him, able to just make out his features in the faint moonlight through the window. "Why are you really doing this, Xavier? And don't say it's because it's the right thing to do. Plenty of people know what's right and still choose otherwise. What makes you different?" Xavier was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said softly, "When I was 12, my father got sick. Some kind of wasting illness the doctors couldn't cure. We had no money for medicine, and everyone in our village was too poor or too scared of contagion to help. But there was an old woman who lived in the woods, someone people whispered about, said she was a witch or cursed. She came to our house one night and gave my mother herbs, told her how to brew them into tea. It saved my father's life. He lived another 10 years because of her." He paused. "The next year, the village elders accused that old woman of witchcraft. They burned her alive while everyone watched. My father and I were the only ones who tried to stop it, and we couldn't. I was just a boy, and he was still weak from the illness." Grakka felt her chest go tight. "Xavier." "I never forgot that," Xavier continued. "Never forgot what it felt like to watch someone die just because people were scared of what they didn't understand. So when I saw you staked out there, dying because soldiers decided you were a monster, I thought about that old woman. And I thought, not again. Not if I can help it. Grakka reached out in the darkness and found his face, traced the line of his jaw with her fingers. You carry your own ghosts. We all do, Xavier said, and turned his head to press his lips to her palm, a kiss so gentle it made her breath catch. They stayed like that for a long moment, the air between them suddenly charged with possibility, and Grakka felt her heart beating hard against her ribs. It would be so easy to close the distance between them, to find out what his mouth tasted like, whether his hands were as gentle everywhere as they were when he bandaged her wounds. But something held her back, some awareness that if they crossed that line, there would be no going back to easy companionship, and she wasn't sure either of them was ready for the complications that would bring. Xavier seemed to feel the same hesitation because he pulled back slightly, his hand finding hers and squeezing. We should sleep. Early start tomorrow. Yeah, Grakka agreed, her voice rougher than usual. Sleep. But she lay awake for a long time after Xavier's breathing evened out into sleep, staring at the ceiling and trying to name the feeling in her chest. It wasn't just gratitude, though she was grateful. It wasn't just attraction, though she was definitely attracted to him in ways that surprised her. It was something bigger, something that terrified her because it felt like hope, and hope was dangerous for an orc with no clan and no future. The next month brought the harvest in full, and they worked from dawn to dusk bringing in wheat and barley, picking vegetables from the garden, preserving food for the winter. Grakka learned to make bread and cheese, to pickle vegetables and smoke meat. All the domestic skills she'd never really needed when she had a whole clan to share the work. Xavier proved to be a patient teacher, and she discovered she liked working alongside him, the easy rhythm they fell into, the way they could communicate with just a look or a gesture after weeks of proximity. She also discovered that Xavier sang while he worked, old farming songs and ballads, his voice pleasant if not particularly trained. Sometimes she joined in with orc work songs from her childhood, and he'd stop to listen with a delighted expression, then ask her to teach him the words. The fact that he wanted to learn her language, her songs, made something warm settle in her chest and stay there. One evening in late summer, they finished work early, and Xavier suggested they walk up to the ridge behind the farm to watch the sunset. Grakka agreed, curious, and they hiked up through the pasture land to the top of the hill where they could see for miles in every direction, the land rolling away in shades of gold and green under the lowering sun. I come up here sometimes when I need to think, Xavier said, settling on the grass and patting the ground beside him. Helps to get perspective, see the bigger picture. Grakka sat down next to him, their shoulders nearly touching, and looked out at the view. From here, she could see Xavier's farm laid out below like a toy, the neat fields and the sturdy little house and barn, the road winding away into distance. Beyond that were other farms, other houses, the landscape of human settlement she'd only ever seen as an outsider or an enemy. It's beautiful, she said quietly. Different from my mountains, but beautiful. Tell me about your mountains, Xavier said. I want to picture them. So Grakka told him about the peaks that scraped the sky, about pine forests so thick the sunlight barely reached the ground, about crystal streams that ran ice cold even in summer. She told him about the meadows where wildflowers grew in riots of color, about the caves her clan had lived in, comfortable and dry and decorated with generations of paintings telling the history of her people. She told him about the way the stars looked from the high places, so many and so bright you could read by their light. Xavier listened with rapt attention, and when she finished he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'd like to see that someday. Your mountains. They're probably empty now, Grakka said, the grief always lurking at the edges surging up fresh. Even if anyone survived, they wouldn't go back. The place is cursed now, soaked in blood. Then someday we'll find new mountains, Xavier said. When this is all over, when it's safe, we'll go north and find you new mountains. Grakka turned to look at him, this human who kept saying, we, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like their futures were linked. You can't promise that. You don't know what's coming. No, but I can hope, Xavier said, meeting her eyes. And I can want it. I can want to see the places you love, to understand the things that made you who you are. The sun was setting behind him, turning the sky into streaks of orange and pink and purple, and Grakka looked at Xavier haloed in that light and felt her careful defenses crumble. She reached out and cupped his face in her hand, seeing his eyes widen slightly, and then she leaned in and kissed him. He made a small, surprised sound against her mouth, but then he was kissing her back, his hands coming up to frame her face, and it was gentle and sweet and perfect. Grakka had kissed before, quick rough encounters with orc boys that were more about establishing dominance than affection, but this was different. This was Xavier learning the shape of her mouth, the texture of her tusks, kissing her like she was precious. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, and Xavier's eyes were dark and wondering. Grakka, don't, she said softly. Don't think about why it's a bad idea or all the reasons it can't work. Just for tonight, can we just have this? Xavier searched her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, we can have this. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Grakka let herself fall into it, into him, into the feeling of being wanted not despite what she was but because of it. They stayed on that hilltop as the sun set and the stars came out, kissing and touching and learning each other. And for the first time since the raid, Grakka felt like she might actually have a future worth living. They walked back to the farmhouse in the dark, hand in hand, and fell into bed together with new intent. Xavier made love to her with the same careful attention he brought to everything else, learning what she liked, what made her gasp, adapting to the differences in their bodies with curiosity rather than fear. Grakka had always been taught that human men were selfish lovers, that they took what they wanted without care for their partners, but Xavier put the lie to that, giving as much as he took, maybe more. Afterward they lay tangled together, sweat cooling on their skin, and Grakka felt more at peace than she had in months. Xavier traced idle patterns on her shoulder, his touch light and soothing, and she could feel him thinking, the wheels turning in his head. What happens now? He asked eventually. I don't know, Grakka admitted. This changes things. Does it have to? Xavier shifted to look at her, his expression serious. I mean, yes, obviously we just complicated matters significantly, but the fundamentals haven't changed. You're still recovering, still figuring out what you want to do. I still want you to stay as long as you want to stay. The only difference is now we both know that this, whatever this is between us, is real. It's insane, Grakka said, but without heat. A human and an orc. People would be horrified. People are horrified by lots of things that are actually perfectly fine, Xavier said firmly. Besides, who's going to know? It's just us out here. We can be whatever we want to each other. Grakka wanted to believe that, wanted to sink into the fantasy that they could just exist in this bubble forever, cut off from the world and its prejudices. But reality had a way of intruding, and she knew it was only a matter of time. I love you, she said abruptly, the words pulled from her by the need to say them while she still could. I don't know when it happened, but it's true. I love you, Xavier Kine. Xavier's whole face transformed, joy and wonder spreading across his features. I love you too. I've been halfway in love with you since you made that joke about biting, and I've been all the way in love with you since you started singing while we worked. You're amazing, Grakka. Strong and brave and funny and kind. I'm honored that you'd let me love you." They kissed again, sealing the confession, and Grakka felt tears prick her eyes because this was everything she'd never let herself want, and here it was, real and solid and terrifying in its fragility. They spent the rest of the summer in a kind of golden haze, working the farm by day and falling into each other's arms at night, building something neither of them could quite name but both of them treasured. Grakka felt herself healing, not just physically but emotionally, the wounds from the raid scarring over into something she could live with. She still had nightmares sometimes, still woke gasping and reaching for weapons that weren't there, but Xavier was always there to hold her, to remind her she was safe. In early autumn, Xavier had to make his monthly trip to market to sell produce, and they debated for days about whether Grakka should come with him or stay hidden at the farm. "It's not safe," Xavier argued. "What if someone recognizes what you are? What if there are soldiers?" "It's not safe for you to go alone either," Grakka countered. "What if someone's heard rumors about an orc in the area? What if they're watching to see who might be hiding me?" They finally compromised. Grakka would come but stay heavily disguised, wrapped in a cloak and hood with her hair covered and her tusks filed down slightly so they were less obvious. It made her anxious, deliberately making herself smaller to fit into human spaces, but she trusted Xavier's judgment. The market was in a small village called Millbrook, just a collection of houses around a central square where farmers came to sell their goods. Grakka stayed close to Xavier as they set up their stall, keeping her head down and her hood up, watching the flow of people with wary eyes. Most of them ignored her completely, focused on their own business, but she felt the weight of a few curious stares and had to fight the urge to run. They were doing good business, selling their wheat and vegetables for decent prices, when Grakka saw them. 3 soldiers in uniform, walking through the market and eyeing the crowd. Her whole body went tight with fear, and she touched Xavier's arm in warning. He followed her gaze, and his expression went carefully neutral. "Stay calm. They're just looking around, probably just here for supplies. Don't give them a reason to notice you." Grakka nodded and focused on packing up the goods they'd sold, keeping her movements slow and unremarkable. But she could feel the soldiers getting closer, working their way through the market stalls, and her heart was hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "You there," one of the soldiers called out, and Grakka's blood turned to ice. But the soldier was looking at Xavier, not her. "Where you from, farmer?" "About 8 miles north," Xavier said calmly, gesturing vaguely. "Small place, just me and my wife working the land." His wife. Grakka kept her head down, playing the part while her mind raced at his casual claim on her. The soldier nodded, losing interest already, but his companion was looking at Grakka with narrowed eyes. "Your wife's a shy one, doesn't show her face." "She's scarred," Xavier said easily, the lie smooth and practiced. "Fire when she was a child makes people uncomfortable, so she keeps covered." "No offense meant." The soldier made a dismissive sound. "None taken. You seen any orcs around these parts? We've had reports of one that escaped execution, thought it might have come this way." Xavier's expression didn't change, his voice stayed level, but Grakka felt him tense beside her. "An orc?" "No, haven't seen anything like that. Didn't know any had survived the cleansing up north." "One did apparently," the soldier said with clear disgust. "Female, about average height for their kind, dangerous. If you see anything, you report it immediately. There's a reward." "Of course," Xavier said, nodding seriously. "We'll keep our eyes open." The soldiers moved on, and Grakka had to concentrate on breathing normally, on not shaking apart from the fear and anger roiling through her. Xavier finished the last few sales, and then they packed up the wagon and got out of Millbrook as quickly as they could without looking like they were fleeing. They were a mile down the road before either of them spoke. "They're looking for you," Xavier said, his voice tight. "Actively searching." "I know." Grakka pulled back her hood now that they were clear of the village, needing air. "I'm putting you in danger just by existing. Maybe I should leave, head north like I planned." "No," Xavier said sharply. "No, you're not leaving. We're not splitting up." "Xavier, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," he interrupted, pulling the wagon to a stop and turning to face her. "You're the woman I love. I'm not going to send you off alone just because some soldiers are asking questions. We'll be more careful, that's all. You'll stay at the farm. I'll handle the market trips. We'll make it work." Grakka looked at him, this stubborn human who'd decided she was worth protecting and wouldn't be swayed, and felt her resolve crumble. "You're going to get yourself killed for me." "Better than living without you," Xavier said simply, and kissed her before she could argue any more. They made it home without further incident, but the encounter at the market had shaken them both. That night they clung to each other in bed, and Grakka couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, that their golden bubble was about to burst. A few weeks later, her premonition proved correct. It was late afternoon and they were in the barn, Xavier teaching Grakka how to repair a broken wagon wheel, when they heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast, and Xavier's face went white. "Hide," he said urgently, pushing her toward the back of the barn. "Get in the loft. Stay quiet, no matter what happens." Grakka wanted to argue, but the fear in his eyes convinced her. She climbed quickly into the hay loft and burrowed deep into the hay, her heart pounding, while Xavier went out to meet whoever was coming. Through the gaps in the barn boards, she could see 6 mounted soldiers ride into the yard, and the one in front had the insignia of a captain on his uniform. They dismounted and surrounded Xavier, hands on their sword hilts, and the captain stepped forward with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Xavier Kine," the captain said, "we've had reports that you might be harboring a fugitive orc. Mind if we search your property?" "I'm not harboring anyone," Xavier said, his voice steady. "You're welcome to look around if you need to, but you won't find anything." The captain nodded to his men and they fanned out, 2 heading for the house, 2 for the barn. Grakka pressed herself deeper into the hay, barely breathing as the soldiers came into the barn below. They poked around the ground floor, checking the stalls and the equipment storage, and she prayed they wouldn't think to check the loft. But one of them looked up, saw the loft, and started climbing the ladder. Grakka made a split-second decision. She could hide and let them find her anyway, which would prove Xavier had been lying and get him executed alongside her. Or she could run, lead them away from the farm, give Xavier a chance to claim ignorance. She erupted from the hay as the soldier's head cleared the loft floor, slamming into him and sending him tumbling back down the ladder. Then she was jumping down after him, rolling to absorb the impact and sprinting for the barn door. There. Someone shouted, and then they were all chasing her, soldiers and horses thundering after her as she ran for the tree line at the edge of Xavier's property. She could hear Xavier shouting, protesting, but she didn't look back, couldn't look back, just ran with everything she had. She made it to the trees and plunged into the forest, dodging between trunks, her orc eyesight and instincts giving her an advantage in the dim light under the canopy. The soldiers followed, crashing through the underbrush, and Grakka led them on a twisting chase deeper into the woods, away from the farm, away from Xavier. She could hear them spreading out, trying to flank her, and she knew she couldn't outrun horses forever even in the forest. She was trying to figure out her next move when she heard a different sound, fighting back toward the farm. Xavier's voice raised in anger, the clash of metal. Terror flooded through her. Xavier was fighting the soldiers who'd stayed behind, trying to defend her honor even though she was gone. He was going to get himself killed. Grakka changed direction instantly, racing back toward the farm, and the soldiers pursuing her shouted in confusion. She burst out of the trees to see Xavier grappling with the captain, a bloody sword on the ground nearby, and two more soldiers closing in on him. She didn't think, just acted. She grabbed a fallen branch as thick as her arm and swung it like a club, catching the first soldier across the back of the head and dropping him like a stone. The second soldier turned toward her, and she threw the branch at his face, then followed it in with her fists, years of orc combat training taking over. The soldier went down and she grabbed his sword, turning to find Xavier had gotten the captain in a chokehold, the older man's face going purple. The soldiers who'd been chasing her were emerging from the woods, swords drawn, and Grakka moved to stand back to back with Xavier, both of them breathing hard. "Guess we're doing this the hard way," Xavier said, his voice remarkably calm given the circumstances. "Guess so," Grakka agreed. The soldiers attacked and they defended, Xavier with a sword he'd taken from one of the fallen men, Grakka with her stolen blade. She'd never fought alongside a human before, didn't know Xavier's fighting style, but they adapted to each other instinctively, covering each other's weaknesses, moving in sync like they'd been sparring partners for years. They were good, but the soldiers were trained and armored and there were too many of them. Grakka took a cut across her ribs that burned like fire. Xavier got his arm slashed, blood soaking through his sleeve. They were being driven back toward the barn, losing ground, and Grakka knew it was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. Then a horn sounded in the distance, long and low, and everyone froze. The sound came again, closer this time, and Grakka's heart leapt because she knew that call. It was an orc war horn, the deep resonant note that her people used to signal each other in battle. The soldiers knew it too, their faces going pale, and the captain who'd recovered from Xavier's chokehold shouted, "Retreat! Fall back to the horses!" But before they could move, orcs emerged from the forest, a dozen green-skinned warriors in leather armor, moving in perfect formation. At their head was a woman Grakka recognized with shock and joy. Marga. She shouted because it was her little sister, alive and grown fierce, leading a war band like she'd been born to it. Marga's eyes found Grakka and widened, then narrowed with determination. She barked an order in the old tongue and the orc warriors attacked, falling on the soldiers with brutal efficiency. The fight was over in minutes, the soldiers dead or fled, and then Marga was running to Grakka and crushing her in a hug so tight Grakka's ribs ached. "I thought you were dead," Marga said fiercely, pulling back to look at Grakka's face. "I searched everywhere, found the place they'd staked you out, but you were gone. I thought the crows had taken you." "A friend saved me," Grakka said, turning to gesture to Xavier, who was standing there looking completely overwhelmed by the sudden appearance of a dozen orcs. "Xavier Kine, this is my sister Marga. Marga, this is Xavier. He cut me loose and brought me to his farm, healed me, kept me safe." Marga looked Xavier up and down with clear skepticism. "A human saved you. Why?" "Because it was the right thing to do," Xavier said, meeting her eyes steadily despite the blood running down his arm. "And because your sister is an extraordinary person who deserved better than to die staked out in the sun." Marga's expression softened slightly at that, but she still looked suspicious. "What were you doing with my sister when those soldiers attacked? Why were you fighting for her?" "Because I love her," Xavier said simply. "Because she's mine and I'm hers, and I'll defend her with my life if I have to." That startled Marga into silence, and she looked between them with dawning understanding. "You're bonded. You and this human are bonded." Yes, Grakka said, moving to stand beside Xavier and taking his uninjured hand. I know it's unconventional, but it's real. He's my mate, Marga. I claim him before the clan. There was a long, tense silence while Marga processed this, the other orc warriors watching with fascinated interest. Then Marga sighed and shook her head. Mother would have laughed herself sick at this, her eldest daughter bonding with a human farmer. But she was smiling as she said it, and she reached out to clasp Grakka's shoulder. If he's your choice, sister, then I honor it. Any human brave enough or crazy enough to love an orc deserves respect. Xavier let out a breath he'd clearly been holding. Thank you. That means more than you know. Don't thank me yet, Marga said darkly. Those soldiers who fled will report back. They'll send more, maybe a whole company. This place isn't safe anymore. I know, Grakka said quietly, looking around at Xavier's farm, this place that had been her sanctuary and her home. We'll have to leave. Go north like I originally planned. Come with us, Marga said. We're reforming the clan, gathering survivors. We've got about 40 people now, camped in the deep mountains to the north and east. It's not much, but it's defensible and it's home. Grakka looked at Xavier, the question in her eyes. It was a huge thing to ask, for a human to join an orc clan, to leave behind everything he knew. But Xavier smiled and squeezed her hand. I told you we'd find new mountains, he said. Lead the way. They spent a frantic hour gathering what they could from the farm, Xavier packing clothing and tools and supplies while Marga's warriors stood guard. Grakka helped, her heart aching as she looked at this small house that had become home, knowing they were leaving it forever. But Xavier moved through it with calm efficiency, taking what was practical and leaving what wasn't. And she realized he'd already let go, already made the choice to walk away. When they were ready, Xavier took one last look at his farm, the land his parents had worked and died on, the place he'd planned to spend his whole life. Then he turned his back on it and took Grakka's hand, and they walked away together. The journey north took 3 weeks, moving carefully to avoid human settlements and soldier patrols. Xavier adapted to traveling with an orc war band with surprising ease, learning their ways, earning their respect through his willingness to work and his obvious devotion to Grakka. Marga in particular seemed to warm to him, and by the end of the first week, she was joking with him and teaching him orc songs around the campfire. Grakka learned that Marga had survived the raid by hiding in the river, letting the current carry her downstream while the village burned. She'd found other survivors, orcs from neighboring clans who'd also lost everything, and she'd pulled them together through sheer force of will, becoming the leader their people needed. At only 18, she was already showing the strength and wisdom that would make her a great clan mother someday. I'm proud of you, Grakka told her one night as they sat watch together. Mother would be proud too. Mother would tell me I'm too reckless and need to think before I act, Marga said with a sad smile. But thank you. I'm trying to honor her memory, honor the clan. You're doing more than that, Grakka said. You're building something new, something that can survive. Marga looked over to where Xavier was sleeping wrapped in a blanket, his face peaceful in the firelight. What's he like? Really like, I mean, not just the brave face he shows us. He's kind, Grakka said softly, gentle but not weak. He sees me as a person, not a monster or a curiosity. He makes me laugh. He sings while he works. He's the best man I've ever known, human or orc. You really love him. More than I thought I could love anyone, Grakka admitted. It terrifies me sometimes, how much. Love is terrifying, Marga agreed. That's how you know it's real. They reached the new clan settlement in the 4th week, a hidden valley deep in the mountains where a small orc community had built homes from timber and stone. It wasn't much compared to what they'd lost, but it was defensible and isolated, and the people were working hard to make it sustainable. Xavier was welcomed cautiously, the clan members wary of a human in their midst, but his willingness to work and his clear devotion to Grakka won them over gradually. He learned orc crafts, helped build homes, shared his farming knowledge to improve their food production. Slowly, grudgingly, the clan accepted him as one of their own. Marga, as the acting clan mother, performed their bonding ceremony a month after they arrived, a traditional orc ritual under the full moon with the whole clan as witnesses. Grakka wore flowers in her hair and Xavier wore an orc-made tunic, and they exchanged vows in both languages, promising to stand together through whatever came. When they kissed to seal the bond, the clan erupted in cheers and drumming, and Grakka felt tears streaming down her face because she'd never thought she'd have this, never thought she'd have family and community and love again. But here it was, rebuilt from ashes, stronger for having been broken. That night in the small house the clan had built for them, Xavier and Grakka lay tangled together, talking softly about the future. "You miss it?" Grakka asked. "Your farm, human society, the life you had." Xavier considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, but I don't regret leaving. Everything I need is right here." "We could go back someday," Grakka offered. "When things are safer, when the hunting has died down, we could reclaim your farm." "Maybe," Xavier said. "Or maybe we'll build something new here. The clan needs farmers, people who know how to work the land. I can teach them, help establish better food production. We can make this place thrive. You're thinking long-term." "I'm thinking forever," Xavier corrected, pulling her closer. "I'm thinking about growing old with you, watching this community flourish, maybe raising children who will be part of both our worlds." Grakka felt her breath catch at the mention of children, the possibility of a future that stretched beyond just survival. Half human, half orc children. That would be unprecedented. "We're already unprecedented," Xavier pointed out. "Might as well go all the way." They made love then, slow and tender, and Grakka felt the last of her grief and fear finally release its hold on her heart. She'd lost so much, her clan, her family, her home, but she'd found something new, something better than she'd imagined. She'd found love and purpose and a future worth fighting for. Over the following year, Xavier became an integral part of the clan, his farming expertise helping them establish terraced fields and irrigation systems that doubled their food production. He taught the younger orcs about crop rotation and composting, and they taught him about mountain hunting and wilderness survival. The cultural exchange went both ways, and the clan grew stronger for it. Grakka took on the role of war leader, training the fighters and organizing patrols to keep the valley safe. She and Marga worked together to lead the clan, complementing each other's strengths, and the people thrived under their joint leadership. Word of the mixed clan began to spread, and other refugees found their way to the valley, orcs who'd heard rumors of a place where survivors had gathered. The population grew to nearly 100, then 150, and the settlement expanded to accommodate them all. Some of the new arrivals were skeptical of Xavier at first, but his gentle competence and obvious love for Grakka won them over, just as it had won over the original members. In the spring of their second year in the valley, Grakka discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier while they were working in the fields together, planting the season's crops, and his face went through about 6 different expressions in rapid succession before settling on pure joy. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We're going to have a baby." "Half orc, half human," Grakka said, watching him nervously for any sign of doubt or fear. "There's no telling what the child will be like, what features it will inherit. Some might see it as an abomination." "Some people are idiots," Xavier said firmly, dropping to his knees in the dirt and pressing his hands to her stomach. "This is our child made from love, Nothing about that could ever be an abomination. This is a miracle." Grakka felt tears spring to her eyes, hormones already making her more emotional than usual. "You're not afraid." "I'm terrified," Xavier admitted with a laugh. "I don't know the first thing about being a father, but I'm also more excited than I've ever been about anything. We're creating something new, Grakka. A bridge between our peoples. That's incredible." The clan celebrated the news with cautious optimism, recognizing the significance of the first child born to their new community, the first child of both human and orc blood. Marga appointed herself protective aunt immediately, fussing over Grakka and making sure she rested enough and ate properly. The pregnancy progressed normally, though Grakka's orc constitution made it easier than human pregnancies apparently were. She continued her duties as war leader through the first 2 trimesters, only stepping back in the final months when her bulk made fighting impractical. Their daughter was born on a clear autumn morning, delivered by the clan's midwife with Xavier gripping Grakka's hand the whole time. She came into the world screaming her lungs out, and when they laid her on Grakka's chest, both parents just stared in wonder. She was perfect, a blend of both their heritages. Her skin was a soft sage green, lighter than a full orc but clearly not human. Her ears were pointed but not as dramatically as a full orc's. She had tiny tusks, barely nubs, that would grow more pronounced as she aged. Her eyes were Xavier's chestnut brown, and she had a full head of black hair. "She's beautiful," Xavier whispered, touching one tiny hand with a gentle finger. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name her?" Grakka asked, unable to look away from her daughter's face. They discussed names for months, debating the merits of human names versus orc names, trying to find something that honored both cultures. In the end, Xavier suggested a compromise. "Luna," he said. "It means moon in an old human language, and I know the moon is sacred to orc culture. For her middle name, we could use Grakka's clan name. Luna Stone River Kine." "Luna Stone River Kine," Grakka repeated, testing it out. "I like it, it's strong, honorable." She looked at their daughter, this tiny perfect being who represented everything they'd fought for. "Welcome to the world, Luna. Your parents love you more than you can possibly know." The clan took to Luna immediately, everyone wanting to meet the first child of the new settlement. She became a symbol of hope, proof that their people could not just survive but grow and change and build something new. Other mixed couples began to form in the clan, human refugees who'd found their way to the valley falling in love with orc members, boundaries dissolving in the face of shared struggle and mutual respect. Xavier proved to be a devoted father, spending hours playing with Luna, teaching her words in both languages, singing her to sleep with lullabies from both cultures. Grakka watched them together and felt her heart swell with gratitude for this life she'd never expected to have. Luna grew quickly, showing the accelerated development of her orc heritage, and by her first birthday she was walking and talking, a bright, curious child who loved stories and exploration. She adored both her parents and her Aunt Marga, and the whole clan doted on her shamelessly. On Luna's second birthday, the clan held a great celebration, and it was then that Marga made an announcement. She was stepping down as clan mother, ceding the position to Grakka, who had the wisdom and experience to lead their people into the future. "I'm a war leader," Marga said when Grakka protested. "You're the one with the vision, the one who can build something lasting. Besides, you're the eldest. It's your birthright." So Grakka became clan mother, with Xavier as her consort and advisor, and together they guided their people through the challenges of building a new society. They established trade with a few open-minded human settlements, carefully selected merchants who saw the value in peace rather than war. They created laws that honored both orc and human customs, building a hybrid culture that was stronger than either alone. More mixed children were born over the years, each one celebrated, each one proof that their experiment was working. The clan grew to over 300 people, a thriving community in their hidden valley, and other orc clans began to hear about them, some sending representatives to learn how they'd achieved such stability. Xavier never forgot his roots, teaching anyone who wanted to learn about human farming and construction techniques. But he was fully part of orc culture now, accepted and respected as Grakka's mate and Luna's father. He'd let his hair grow long in the orc style, and had earned his place in the clan through years of hard work and dedication. On their 10th anniversary in the valley, Grakka and Xavier stood on the ridge overlooking their settlement, watching the sun set over the mountains. Luna was playing below with a group of other children, mixed and full orc, their laughter floating up on the evening breeze. "Do you remember that first night?" Grakka asked, leaning against Xavier's shoulder. "When you found me staked out to die?" "Every detail," Xavier said, wrapping his arm around her. "I remember thinking you were the strongest person I'd ever seen, still fighting to live even when everything was trying to kill you. I remember thinking you were crazy for helping me," Grakka admitted with a smile. "Suicidally kind." "Best decision I ever made," Xavier said firmly. "Everything good in my life came from that choice. You, Luna, this clan, all of it. I wouldn't change a single thing." They stood there as the sky darkened and the stars came out, the same stars that had watched over both their peoples for generations. Below them, the settlement glowed with lamplight and cooking fires, full of life and laughter and hope. "We did it," Grakka said softly. "We built something lasting. Something worth dying for." "Something worth living for," Xavier corrected, kissing her temple. "And we're not done yet. We've got years ahead of us, watching Luna grow up, building this clan, maybe even changing the world a little bit." "Changing the world through radical kindness," Grakka said with a laugh. "Very on brand for you." "You love it," Xavier teased. "I do," Grakka agreed, turning to face him fully. "I love you, Xavier Kine. Thank you for seeing past what I was and seeing who I could be. Thank you for building this life with me." "Thank you for letting me," Xavier replied, and kissed her as the stars wheeled overhead and their daughter's laughter echoed through the valley. They walked back down to the settlement hand in hand, ready to face whatever tomorrow brought, secure in the knowledge that they would face it together. The orc woman who'd been left to die had found not just survival but joy, not just refuge but home, and the farmer who'd stopped to help had found his purpose and his heart. Below them, Luna saw them coming and ran to meet them, throwing herself into their arms with the complete trust of a child who'd never known anything but love. They caught her together, Xavier and Grakka, human and orc, partners and parents, and proof that sometimes the most radical act of rebellion is simply choosing to love across the boundaries others have drawn. The clan gathered for the evening meal, everyone sharing food and stories around the communal fires, and Grakka looked around at the faces of her people and felt complete. She'd lost her first clan to violence and hatred, but she'd built a new one from love and hope, and that made it even more precious. That night, after Luna was asleep and the settlement had quieted for the evening, Grakka and Xavier lay in their bed and talked about the future, making plans for the clan's expansion, discussing trade agreements and construction projects. It was mundane and domestic and perfect, exactly the kind of future Grakka had never dared to dream of when she'd been staked out in the sun waiting to die. "I want to write this down," Xavier said suddenly. "Our story, how we met, how we built this place. For Luna and the other children, so they know where they came from." History written by those who lived it, Grakka mused. I like that idea. We'll write it together, both perspectives, both voices. We'll call it a love story, Xavier said with a smile. We'll call it a survival story, Grakka countered. It's both, Xavier said, pulling her close. The best stories always are. And so they lived, the farmer and the orc woman, writing their story day by day through their choices and their love. They raised their daughter to be strong and kind, to honor both her heritages, to build bridges rather than walls. They led their clan with wisdom and compassion, creating a society that valued all its members regardless of their origin. They showed the world that love could cross any boundary, heal any wound, build any future. Years later, when Xavier was old and gray and Grakka's black hair had turned silver, they still sat together on that ridge at sunset, watching their grandchildren play in the settlement below. The clan had grown to over 1,000 people, a true community that had become legendary in the region, the place where orcs and humans lived in harmony. You have any regrets? Grakka asked, her voice cracked with age but still strong. Not a single one, Xavier replied, his hand finding hers with the ease of decades of practice. Only that I can't do it all over again, Grakka said with a smile, though I suppose once is enough for a lifetime. One lifetime, Xavier agreed, but what a lifetime it's been. They sat together as the sun set on another day in their valley, surrounded by the family they'd created and the community they'd built. Proof that even from the darkest moments, hope could grow. The orc woman who'd been staked out to die had found life beyond her wildest dreams, and the farmer who'd stopped to help had found his home. And in the end, that was the greatest triumph of all. Not just survival, but joy. Not just refuge, but belonging. Not just love, but legacy. They had taken the worst the world could offer and transformed it into something beautiful, something lasting, something that would echo down through generations long after they were gone. Their story, written in the lives of their children and their clan, would be told and retold around fires for centuries to come. The tale of the orc woman and the farmer who chose love over hate, courage over fear, and built a new world from the ashes of the old. It was a story of redemption and hope, of second chances and new beginnings, of the radical power of kindness to change everything. And it all started with one simple choice. A passing farmer who saw someone suffering and decided to stop and help, no matter the cost. That choice rippled outward like waves on water, touching hundreds of lives, creating a future that neither Xavier nor Grakka could have imagined when they first met. As the stars came out above their valley, and the sounds of their family settled in for the night around them, Grakka and Xavier smiled at each other with the deep satisfaction of a life well lived, a love well earned, and a future well built. They had faced death and chosen life, faced hate and chosen love, faced despair and chosen hope, and in the end, love won. It always did, as long as there were people brave enough to fight for it.